In a few months, the Nintendo Switch will be 7 years old. Now, 7 years isn't a particularly noteworthy milestone in most respects, but it is a pretty big one for Nintendo consoles. Give or take a few months, Nintendo has never gone more than 7 years without releasing a new home console. In fact, none of the 3 current major home console companies in the last 40 years have gone more than 7 years without a new home console release, outside of that one time when the Xbox One was released 8 years after the Xbox 360. The 7 years between the Switch's launch and now has led to a ton of speculation in the past few years about Nintendo's inevitable next console, which some people are calling the Switch 2. I really hope they don't call it that. But anyway, the next Nintendo console is probably coming soon. That's the precedent that history has set. In fact, Nintendo consoles usually last less than 7 years. The gap between the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube was only about 5 years and 3 months. The gap between the GameCube and the Wii was only 5 years and 2 months. And the gap between the Wii U and the Switch was only 4 years and 4 months. So Nintendo life cycles have always leaned on the shorter side. However, as I mentioned before, going by past events, 7 years is almost always the cutoff point for a new game console. But why is that? I mean, theoretically, a console could last 10 years or 15 years, maybe even 20 years, right? So why is it that console lifespans end after 5 to 7 years? Well, the biggest reason I can think of is quite obvious. It's hard to make bigger and more graphically impressive games when you have less processing power. PCs get better and better every year with more advanced CPUs and graphics cards allowing for more eye-catching games, but console games are stuck using the same old components for 7 years. Now, game console companies have tried to remedy this issue by giving some consoles mid-generation upgrades. The Sega Genesis has the Sega CD, which allows the Genesis to play CD-based games. The Genesis also has the Sega 32X, which adds a 32-bit processor to the formerly 16-bit system. The Nintendo 64 has the N64 expansion pack that increases the console's RAM from 4 megabytes to 8 megabytes. And the 64 also has the 64DD, which gives the console a magnetic disk drive. Sony released a new version of the PlayStation 4 called the PS4 Pro, which is a more powerful version of the console that can play games in 4K. Microsoft even decided to release their new Xbox console in different tiers, with the basic Xbox Series S and the higher-end, more powerful model, the Xbox Series X. Releasing upgrades to a console has some benefits and drawbacks, and what those are depend on how the upgrade is done. The PS4 Pro is what I like to call a soft upgrade. Soft mid-generation upgrades aren't required for any games, they simply make the playing experience better. The Sega CD is what I like to call a hard upgrade. Hard mid-generation upgrades have new games that are available to you if you have the upgraded version. The downside of soft upgrades is that while they do make playing games more comfortable and maybe a bit prettier, because they aren't required to play any games, it means developers can't really add new mechanics to take advantage of the more powerful hardware. The downside of hard upgrades is that while they can allow players access to new games that weren't possible or practical on the original version of the console, playing any of these games requires players to go out and buy an expensive upgrade. And historically speaking, hard mid-generation upgrades have basically always had a very small library of games, most likely because only a fraction of the player base is going to be willing to go out and buy an upgrade for the console. So as a developer, why would you waste time on an upgraded console with such a small user base when you can just make games for the original console that a ton of people already have? So as you can see, mid-generation upgrades are not a perfect solution to solving how quickly consoles are outdated. Another reason why console lifespans are as long as they are is because 5 to 7 years is about as short of a time you can give people before they're comfortable with shelving out an extra couple $100 for a new console. I know if every 2 years I had to drop $400 on a new PlayStation, I'd be pretty pissed. I wouldn't feel like I'm getting my money's worth. While I don't particularly like dropping a ton of cash, once about 7 years have gone by, I can deal with it. So now that I've laid out a few reasons as to why consoles die after about 7 years, I guess I should ask, when should a game console die? Like, take the Switch for example. Nearly 7 years in, and Nintendo is still releasing Switch games that are doing insanely well. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which have only been out for a little over a year, and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which hasn't even been out for 8 months, are already in the top 10 best-selling Switch games of all time. Super Mario Bros. Wonder sold over 4 million copies in its first 2 weeks. Even nicher titles like Pikmin 4 have sold multiple millions of units. And not only that, but there are tons of new titles that Nintendo announced that are coming out for the Switch that'll undoubtedly sell very well. The Switch is still very much alive, and its player base grows bigger every year. So I wonder, should Nintendo even make a Switch 2? Does the Switch have to die? Personally, I don't think it does. I unironically think Nintendo should just rock out with the Switch until its wheels fall off and people stop buying games, because they have a really good thing going here. Nintendo is in a really interesting place because for years they've been known for having underpowered systems. This sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually really good. Since developers who make games for the Switch don't have a powerful platform to work with, they don't have to participate in the rat race where everyone is trying to make the biggest, boldest, most graphically impressive games out there, which gives them way more time and resources to just focus on making fun games. And since Nintendo doesn't have to worry about making the most technically astonishing games out there, they don't really have a need to make a new console, because like I said, consoles aging and not being able to keep up with the cutting edge games that game devs are putting out is probably the biggest reason why game console companies make new consoles. I mentioned earlier that 7 years is around the time people are willing to wait before they feel like they got their money's worth out of a console. Well, if you just don't release a new console, consumers won't have to worry about dropping extra cash for a new system and new games. Just look at cell phones. I ran a poll on my YouTube channel, and most people said they get a new phone after every 5 or more years. Cell phones, like gaming consoles, are expensive, but unlike consoles, new cell phones from Samsung, Apple, and Google come out every single year, and usually there are only a few noteworthy improvements in each iteration, so most people don't feel the need to get a new one. Several people in the comments of my poll even said that they'd only get a new phone if their old one broke or became unusable for some reason. So why can't consoles be the same way? Just stick with the Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series X until they're just unplayable. To answer the question, when should a game console die? Well, a game console should die if and when it needs to. We've seen consoles like the NES, Wii, and PlayStation 2 have games released for their platforms years after their primes, so it shows that people are still willing to buy games for old consoles if there's good stuff still coming out. Another benefit to releasing games late in a console's lifespan is that at that point, developers will have had time to get used to the console's architecture, allowing for better optimization and more impressive games. Compare Assassin's Creed, which was released pretty early in the PS3's lifespan, to something like The Last of Us, which was a late PS3 game. The leap in graphical fidelity is pretty noticeable. Obviously, I don't think this will happen, but I would really love it if Nintendo just ran the Switch into the ground for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or however long it takes for people to stop caring about the thing. And heck, let Sony and Microsoft get in on the fun too. I want chaos. I want to see a console generation that lasts 20 years. PCs are always going to be ahead in terms of power and performance, so consoles should just say screw it and embrace being the fun, creative, low-budget alternative. Game consoles should never die. Thanks for watching, y'all, and have a great rest of your day.